Okay, so I've had a couple of questions from students asking me to show how you go from a spreadsheet like this one on the screen um, with a bar graph representing the bead data. So each of these little cells represent 5% of the bead data, and the various colors here represent the different types, to the battleship frequency curve. That's what I'm going to show you here. So recall that it comes from our kind of fossil index concept here, in that we know that the type 1 shell beads are the oldest bead types in the area. And the underlying assumption then is that the site with the highest frequency of the oldest beads would be the oldest site in the area. So we look at our data here, we see that type 1 are our white blocks, our white cells, and that big rock has 100% of the bead type. So when we're creating our battleship curves, what we want to do is put our oldest site at the bottom. So here's Big Rock. And then what we're going to do is we're going to start in the lower left-hand corner. So right here where my cursor is, we are going to put our type 1 beads, and we are going to count out 100. So it's 30, 40, 70, 80, 90, 100 cells. There we go. And I just clicked on the top. I don't know if you saw that there. And what I'm doing for white is I'm just actually creating the border here. And so this is going to be my column then for type 1 beads. Okay. Then what I want to figure out is what bead type is replacing my oldest known bead types, so the shell beads. And so for this, if I look over, what I want to see is I should see a decline in type 1 beads and then replacement with one other bead type. So it could be multiple other bead types. We kept it really simple for this activity. It's just one. So what do I see? Well, quite clearly is that the next site that has the next highest frequency of white shell or type 1 beads is spruce. So what I'm going to do is count and see what the frequency is here. So it's 85%. Okay, so I'm going to put spruce as my next one. I might have to move these, but we'll start here. For simplicity's sake, I'm just going to left to justify everything. And so I'm going to count out 85. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 85. Okay, so that's going to represent my type 1. But of course, if we go back to my frequency chart, we see that we also have 15% of type 5 or yellow beads. So what that suggests to me is that type 5 or the yellow beads is the next bead type, and this is the bead type that is replacing my type 1 beads. Okay, and this is then the next one in the sequence. So I have type 1 column here, type 5. How do I figure out what my next site is? Well, it should be a site that has less of type 1 and now an increased amount of type 5. So I go back to my frequencies and I see that we have two sites where we have a lesser amount or lesser frequency of type 1. So we have Pine and McEwen. They both have not only a lesser amount of type 1, they also show a higher amount of our type 5. And then we see a third bead type or type 3 being introduced. And clearly, because we see that type or that Pine still has the next highest frequency of our type 1 beads, this has to be the next in the sequence. So Pine has 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 of type 1. So I'm going to go over here. I'm going to type in Pine. And I'm going to just left justify it. I'm going to count to 50. So it's 20, 30, 40, 50. Hit up here. That's going to make it white. Okay. Now I have to put in here how many of the type 5 beads that are here. So we're going to count this. We have 10, 20, 30, 45. So 45. So 10 or 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40, 45. So that's going to be yellow. And we now have, what type was that again? Let's go back. We have 5% representing type 3 at Pine, which is the blue tubes. Okay, so that's our next one that we're going to start here. So what this shows me is that we have type 1 as our oldest beads. They're gradually being replaced by, which our historical record tells us, are glass beads, but in this case, it's our type 5, so the yellow glass beads. Then we see type 3 beads being introduced, And so then we're going to keep following this pattern to figure out what the next few types are. So let's go back over here to frequencies. We already know that McEwen has shell, so it has to be next. It has 10%. So we're going to put McEwen here. We're going to put in our little 10%. Oops. The top, click on that. Okay. It's got to have our yellow or our type 5. So 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Okay, let's go back to the battleship curve. Now I'm going to put in 60%. 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. Oh, look, it's starting to overlap with my type 3. So let's just move this over a bit. Let's move this to here. So I'm just selecting the little fill thing to get the color cell. Let's make this no fill. Okay, and then we can just cut this, and then we'll just paste this here. There we go. So we'll just give ourselves some more room here to work with. Okay. Okay, we're not done with McEwen, right? So we had 10% of type 1. We had whatever percentage was 60, I think it was, for type 5. Let's see how many of type 3 it had. And for McEwen, we had 10, 20, 30. Okay, so let's go to battleships, and we're going to draw 30. 10, 20, 30. Again, we go up to the little fill thing. It's like a little paint can. Click on the blue to match it, and there we go. So now what we're starting to see is this trend, again, shifting over. So let's see if we go back to the frequency chart. So we no longer have any of the oldest bead types, but we've already established that the pattern then is a replacement of type 5 with type 3. So we want to see if there's any other sites that follow this pattern of now a decreasing amount of type 3 type 5 as type 3 increases. And so we see that with Little Creek, right? Because Foxtail Muskrat Hill have a whole other type in there. So this tells us that they're way more recent, okay? So now we have Little Creek. Okay, so let's go back to the battleship. So we're going to have none of type 1. It's type 5 we want to look at, okay? So type 5 for Little Creek. So that's our next one. Little Creek. And for type 5 of Little Creek, we have 1025. So let's put that in here, 1025. Okay. For type 3, we have 10, 20, 30, 40, 55. Okay. Do the same thing here, 10, 20, 30, 40, 55. Okay, and then what is it being replaced with? With black, and that's our type 2. So we have to scroll this over. I'm going to go over, give myself a buffer room here, and this is type 2 beads. Okay, so how many of this was there? There are 20. Okay, so 20 are going to be my type 2. Okay. So see that nice linear trend where we see from Big Rock up through to Little Creek, this replacement of this decline in type 1, an incline, then decline in type 5, an incline in type 3. Now type 2 is being introduced, so what pattern should we see? Well, type 5 should disappear. Type 3 should start to either increase or start to decrease as we then see an increase in type 2. And then finally, we should have our last type, type 4, being introduced. So let's see what follows this pattern. So we want to see blue, then black, then pink. And so that's what we see with Little Creek and Muskrat Hills. We see with Foxtail Muskrat Hills, we see blue and black and pink. Well, we know that it's black replacing blue. So what that means is that we should see a higher frequency of black or type 2 first. Then we should see a low amount of our last type come in, and that's what Foxtail shows us in the pattern. So let's go to Foxtail. Okay, and we're going to scroll all the way over to blue for type 3. Okay, and so for type 3 for Foxtail, we have 10, 20, 30. We're going to do the same here. So 10, 5, 10, 20, 30. Oops, that one too. Oh, that's right. Okay, make that blue. Oops, that's a different blue. Oh well, you get the idea. So it's important to use distinct colors, or at least close enough. Now we want to have type 2. We have foxtail, which is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Okay, so 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 is going to be our black. And now we need to add in our type 4. Roll all the way over. Sorry, I'm kind of going through this oddly. Oh, we're going to need to insert some rows here just to make sure that they're all the right width. Insert. Insert. So I'm just right clicking on the top of the, or sorry, not row, column tier to insert new columns. You can also do it another way too, but that takes too long. So we're just going to do it the fast way. Type 4 is our remainder. Okay, and we want to find out how many of type 4 we had at Foxtail, and we had 20%. So we'll do 20% here, and that's pink. There we go. Okay, and now we can do our last site, which is going to be our youngest site because it has the highest frequencies of the most recent bead types. And that's going to be our Muskrat Hill. So again, we're going to start with our type 3, and we have 10, 20, 30 of that. 10, 20, 30. So you can see type 3 is kind of stabilized out at this point. It hasn't been replaced outright. It's not in decline per se, but it's definitely not as popular as our type 4 is at this point, or type 2 is at this point. So let's see what type 2 is. Type 2 is, oh no, so type 2 actually declined. So it has kind of a short-lived popularity. So it's 20. So we'll do 20 here. Oops. Helps if I click the right thing. And then we have our type 4, our last one, which is 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Okay, and so we'll put that in. I'm going to run out of cells here, so let's just pretend that that's 50. Okay, so there we go. So there is my frequency seriation chart. If I go down here and zoom out a little, let me zoom out. Oh, you know what? My little picture window is in the way. Let's zoom out here. And so this is what you should have. It's something very similar to this. So type 1 beads, type 5, type 3, type 2, then type 4. Again, we see a decline in the frequency of a type as a new one is introduced. And then we can see a decline again, in the older types as newer ones are subsequently, each new one is subsequently introduced. Does that make sense? We basically have the sequence of replacement over time. And so this is my frequency seriation. Oops, I forgot to put what the name of the site is, and it's Muskrat Hills, so I'll put that there. And there we go. And so you can just do a screen cap of this, or you can upload this as your supplement as your frequency battleship seriation. So I hope this video demo, even though it's pretty fast, still kind of shows you the process. If this doesn't make sense, again, you do have the option where you can use graph paper and you can just highlight little cells and color them in with crayons or pencil crayons or do little patterns, whatever makes sense to you. But I find it's really easy to do it in spreadsheet because I'm pretty familiar with just filling in cells with color or adding borders with them. So yeah, let me know if you have any problems. Remember, there's an extended due date, so it's not due today as originally posted. It's now due prior to the start of the exam period, which is April 12th. So take care. And again, don't hesitate to ask me if you have any questions about this or any other parts of the assignment.